On November 4th, 1979, in a single afternoon, America's most powerful Middle Eastern ally vanished, replaced overnight by its most bitter and enduring enemy. What happened inside those embassy walls still shapes every crisis in the region today. 52 American diplomats were seized, blindfolded, and paraded before the world's cameras. For 444 agonizing days, they became the living symbol of a superpower humiliated and a friendship shattered beyond repair. The imagery of blindfolded Americans instantly replaced decades of royal banquets and joint military parades. In one afternoon, the psychological foundation of U.S.-Iran relations was destroyed, and the modern shadow war was born. The hostage crisis lasted until January 20th, 1981, the exact moment Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. Some historians call the timing a calculated humiliation. The feud it created has never truly ended. But to understand why this rupture was so catastrophic, you must first understand what existed before. An alliance so deep, so militarized, and so entangled that its collapse sent shockwaves still felt in every corner of the modern world. The story of the U.S.-Iran alliance begins with a crime. On August 19th, 1953, the CIA and British MI6 orchestrated a coup that overthrew Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh, all to keep Western hands on Iranian oil. Mohammad Mosaddegh had committed the unforgivable sin of nationalizing Iran's oil industry. The West's response was swift and ruthless: fund his opponents, destabilize his government, and install a pliant king who would keep the pipelines flowing. With the Shah firmly installed, Washington made Iran the cornerstone of its Middle East strategy. Under Nixon's Twin Pillars doctrine, Iran became America's designated policeman of the Persian Gulf, the enforcer of Western oil routes. Then came the blank check. In May 1972, President Nixon and Henry Kissinger sat across from the Shah and made an extraordinary offer. Iran could purchase any conventional American weapons system it desired. No limits, no questions asked. Fueled by the 1973 oil boom, the Shah went on the most extraordinary weapons shopping spree in history, spending between $16 and $20 billion on American military hardware, including the crown jewel, F-14 Tomcat fighter jets. By 1978, nearly 50,000 American military trainers, defense contractors, and technicians lived inside Iran. The alliance had become so deep, so intimate, that it was virtually impossible for Washington to imagine Iran without the Shah. But this massive American footprint was quietly igniting a fury. To millions of Iranians, the Shah was not a modernizer. He was a Western puppet, propped up by foreign money and foreign soldiers on Iranian soil. Beneath the gleaming jets and palace banquets, a pressure cooker was building, and Washington, blinded by its own strategic investment, could not see what was coming. But the revolution would not wait to be noticed. In August 1978, just months before the Shah fled Iran forever, the CIA published a confident 23-page assessment. Its conclusion: Iran was, quote, not in a revolutionary or even a pre-revolutionary situation. It was one of the greatest intelligence failures in history. Just months earlier, President Jimmy Carter had raised his glass to the Shah at a New Year's Eve banquet, calling Iran an island of stability. At that very moment, the Shah's secret police were torturing tens of thousands of political prisoners. The Shah's Savak secret police, trained by the CIA and Israel's Mossad, was one of the most feared intelligence agencies in the world. A 1975 Amnesty International report estimated that Iran held up to 100,000 political prisoners. The 1973 oil boom had flooded Iran with petrodollars, but it also triggered devastating inflation that reached nearly 25% by 1977. Millions of Iranians who had migrated to cities found themselves priced out of survival. Here is the fact that rewrites everything you think you know about 1979. The Islamic Revolution was not purely religious. It was a fragile coalition: Marxists, trade unionists, Soviet-aligned leftists, and secular nationalists, who provided the organizational muscle to paralyze the economy. Ayatollah Khomeini initially presented himself as a moderate, even appointing a liberal nationalist prime minister. But once in power, he moved with ruthless efficiency to purge every secular and leftist ally who had helped bring him to victory. The Shah fled Iran on January 16, 1979, carrying a box of Iranian soil. He would never return. The most powerful military force in the Middle East, built with $20 billion American dollars, had collapsed in months. Washington was stunned into silence. But the revolution's most consequential act was still coming. Because 9 months later, those radical students would storm the embassy and ignite a feud that would define the next half-century of global geopolitics. For 20 years after 1979, the official story was simple: America and Iran were enemies, full stop. But the real story, the one buried in classified cables and diplomatic backchannels, was far more complicated and far more shocking. The morning after September 11, 2001, something extraordinary happened. Iran, publicly America's sworn enemy, reached out privately to offer help. Iranian officials recognized a mutual enemy in the Taliban, and they were ready to cooperate. In secret meetings, Iranian officials handed American counterparts something invaluable: detailed maps of Taliban military positions in Afghanistan and search and rescue protocols for downed U.S. pilots. Iran was helping America fight its war. Iranian diplomat Mohammad Javad Zarif was instrumental at the 2001 Bonn conference, helping the United States install Hamid Karzai as Afghanistan's new leader. For a brief, extraordinary moment, the two sworn enemies were building a new order together. Then, in January 2002, President George W. Bush stepped to a podium and destroyed it all in a single sentence. By labeling Iran part of an axis of evil alongside Iraq and North Korea, Bush slammed the door on cooperation and humiliated the Iranian moderates who had risked everything to reach out. But the most astonishing missed opportunity came in May 2003. A fearful Tehran sent a secret 2-page document to Washington, a proposal so sweeping it could have reshaped the entire Middle East. History would call it the Grand Bargain. Iran's offer was staggering: end all military support for Hamas and Hezbollah, accept a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine, open its nuclear program to full international inspection. In exchange, Iran asked only for an end to sanctions and hostility. The Bush administration's response was swift and unambiguous. They threw the proposal away. Worse, they formally reprimanded the Swiss ambassador who had delivered it, punishing a diplomat for attempting to prevent a war. Historians still debate what might have been. But what happened next is not debatable. Iran accelerated its nuclear program, expanded its proxy militias, and both nations descended into a shadow war that has never truly ended. With diplomacy dead, the United States and Iran invented a new kind of war, one fought without declarations, without uniforms, and without clear boundaries. A shadow war waged in cyberspace, in proxy battlefields, and in the dark corridors of intelligence agencies. The opening shot of the modern shadow war was fired not with a bullet, but with code. In 2010, a joint U.S.-Israeli operation unleashed Stuxnet, a malicious computer worm that silently infiltrated Iran's Natanz nuclear facility and tore itself apart from the inside. Stuxnet physically destroyed approximately 1,000 nuclear centrifuges, without a single soldier crossing a border. It was the world's first digital weapon to cross into the physical world, and it changed warfare forever. In the physical realm, Iran built its own weapon, a network of proxy militias stretching from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq. The architect of this empire of proxies was one man, IRGC Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani. For decades, Soleimani moved like a ghost through the region, arming Hezbollah in Lebanon, directing Shia militias in Iraq, and coordinating Assad's forces in Syria. American generals called him the most dangerous man in the Middle East. Then, on January 3, 2020, at 1 a.m. near Baghdad International Airport, an American MQ-9 Reaper drone locked onto a convoy of vehicles. Within seconds, Qasem Soleimani was dead, and the world held its breath for what would come next. Iran's retaliation came within days. Ballistic missiles rained down on the Al-Assad airbase in Iraq, where American troops were stationed. When the dust cleared, 109 U.S. service members had suffered traumatic brain injuries. The world had come to the edge. The cycle continued. In January 2024, an Iran-backed drone struck the Tower 22 outpost in Jordan, killing 3 American soldiers, the first U.S. combat deaths directly attributed to Iranian proxies since the Shadow War began. The U.S. responded with massive airstrikes across Iraq and Syria, targeting Iranian-backed militia positions. Each strike, each retaliation, each escalation locked both nations deeper into a cycle that neither side seemed willing or able to break. Meanwhile, in the waters off Yemen, Iran-backed Houthi rebels launched a campaign that shocked the global economy, attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea, disrupting a corridor carrying 12% of all global maritime trade. Global shipping companies rerouted thousands of vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks and billions of dollars to supply chains. The Shadow War had escaped the Middle East and reached every port, every supermarket shelf, every economy on Earth. At the center of every nightmare scenario involving Iran lies a sliver of water 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz. Through this single choke point flows roughly 20% of all the world's oil supply, every single day. Iran has repeatedly threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to Western sanctions or military pressure. Economists estimate that even a brief closure could spike global oil prices by 50% or more, triggering a worldwide recession within weeks. Iran's nuclear program adds a terrifying dimension to this calculus, with enrichment levels now reaching 60%. Just a technical step from weapons grade. Iran possesses what experts call nuclear latency, the capability to build a bomb within months if it chose to. The JCPOA nuclear deal of 2015 briefly constrained Iran's program, but the United States withdrew from it in 2018. Iran responded by systematically dismantling every restriction it had agreed to, accelerating enrichment to levels not seen since before the deal. Today, Iran sits at the intersection of every major fault line in global security: nuclear proliferation, energy markets, proxy warfare, and the great power competition between the United States, Russia, and China. It is not a regional problem. It is a global one. Then in 2025 and into 2026, the Shadow War finally broke into the open. What had been fought through proxies and code for decades erupted into direct military confrontation, and the world that emerged from it would never look the same. The immediate trigger was Iran's nuclear program. By early 2025, international inspectors had been expelled and enrichment had crossed 90%, weapons grade. The window for diplomacy, which had been narrowing for 2 decades, finally closed.